topic that he's going to talk about, it's actually remarkable that we haven't discussed it yet. In fact, let me ask real quick, how many of you have ever reviewed a product or service online? How many of you have actually submitted a review? Cool, a bunch of you. More than we have people playing games. And how many of you have done so or have at least either contributed to or actively utilized a review on a mobile device? So it's a big thing. You understand that that's here to stay. It's not some kind of passing fad. It really does impact many of us. So I think it's worthwhile to hear a little bit about that phenomenon, where it is and where it's going. Sam, all yours.
All right, thank you all. I think you took away some of my motivation. I do want to say this is some joint work with Nick Lurie at Connecticut. Thank you all for having me here. I hope this is interesting for you. I wanted to start off by saying, and now for something completely different. Most of the time we've been talking about our consumption of content, mobile as a device for consumption. We're flipping over entirely here and talking about mobile as a creation. And so how does that make things different? What we're looking at is mobile reviews. So what is the modern equivalent of a fly in the soup? Right? You raise your hand and say, hey, waiter, come take care of my fly, right? Well, we don't do that anymore, right? We have technology, right? Photo. Tonight I got a free meal because there was literally a fly in my soup, right? That's not confined to the restaurant. That goes beyond the restaurant. The whole Twitter universe, maybe buried in 18 bazillion other tweets, but it's out there. This real-time review stuff is happening not just in the restaurant context we're talking about. It's happening everywhere. And as I say that, I'm acutely aware of all the mobile devices in people's hands. What's changing? Well, let's think about big trends. I think Ali Rama and Tim Rice and some other people really talked about social media and how the rise of that is going on. No surprises there. Lots of connections, lots of ways to make influence. Word of mouth has changed dramatically. While we're all here is this ubiquitous computing. People have these mobile devices in holsters on their belts, right? I don't think that's an accident that the holster is the analogy, right? People are ready to fire. So what Nick and I have done is we compared mobile and user devices, user reviews written on mobile with traditional desktop devices. Three main questions. How do they differ in the content? How does the influence differ? And finally, what's driving these differences? And so that's what I'll talk about some today. There's a belief that reviews written in real time, remember my Sherlock Holmes example, in real time should really capture the event. They're right there. There's no recall bias. There's what's happening right there. So there's a temporal aspect. And there's this physical aspect. The time pressures and trade-offs in how we use the devices may change how we work. So there's a lot going on here that makes this really not a clear question. So we picked restaurant reviews. Why? It's experience good. There's a very clean comparison, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of the people who are doing it. We have reviews from people who've written desktop reviews and those who've written mobile reviews, so we can actually control for the people themselves. We pulled down close to 300,000 of these reviews. In this context, the users can read and write these reviews. There's not a lot of governments. There's some governments that goes on. We did a lot of parsing and downloading of the data. We've got a nice little Linux cluster that can grind its little heart out on these things. We keep track of who the user was, what restaurant they were, when they did it, the actual text of the review, whether it was done on a mobile device or a desktop device, what they recommend. Did they say, hey, you should go see this restaurant? Did you like it? Or did you dislike it? So what's the recommendation? And finally, the number of people that found that review useful and interesting. So the number of people that liked that review. For the most of the discussion today, I'm going to talk about just a focal subset of about 49,000 reviews. And these are reviews where we had the same user doing a mobile review and a desktop review. So what's happening over time? When we first started looking at this data, we said this actually as a theme, the dark red is desktop and mobile. That's going to continue through the remaining slides. We used a linguistic inquiry and word count program. Some people at UT Austin had come up with this. It's used a lot for research in general, but also particularly around transcription, which is kind of fun to read about. It typically categorizes about 86% of the words. An example is that we'll come up with a measure of the negative emotion in a review. It uses words like hurt, ugly, nasty. These are negative words. As an aside, I find this addictive. Once you start analyzing this text, really you can do it for anything. I think about the emails that I get from students. Well, that was awful negative. Well, how negative was it really? Or emails that I get from other people, my spouse. So I've vowed to Stephanie to be 46% more positive, and I can actually quantify that now. I think about the peer reviews I get from my journal articles. How positive or negative are they? How positive or negative? You get sucked down to this. I lost a lot of time here. A lot of time. So I processed the full text of the 300,000 reviews. Kind of hate to say that bullet point so quickly because of the amount of my life it took, but maybe we should just pause for a moment of silence about the time I'll never get back there. I built a measure from this automated readability index of how complicated the wording structures were, how complicated were the sentence structures that they used. And they're actually approximately the same. If anything, mobile gets a little bit of an edge on the complicated sentence structure. That counters my prior. I thought people would be maybe shorter, briefer. I know I am when I'm typing. I wonder what's going on there. We can talk about some of that. This is interesting. Past tense wording. Although the blocks look about the same, look at this median line. Practically, there's a little bit of range in the mobiles, but the median is that there's no past tense wording at all in mobile. This is indicative that people are actually doing these reviews while they're sitting there. They're not saying, I had a great time. They're saying, I'm having a great time. Positive emotion, actually, again, counter to I kind of built this thing up with the fly in the soup. I thought that people were going to be super negative in the mobile reviews, but we're not seeing that. Actually, the positive emotion, there's mobile, if anything, is a little more positive than the desktop reviews. There's not much negative in any of them. And I wonder if some of this may be our context and the site that we've chosen, but there's not a lot of difference in the negativity of the reviews. So we see a good deal of variation in mobile and desktop, and not particularly in the areas that I would have expected. Then the next thing I did was I included all the other attributes we just talked about in the regression and say, okay, how do these other things that we think are different about mobile and desktop, how do they? So we pull those in. And then I put mobile back in. And I was surprised here. Because I thought that if we control for all the differences in mobile, all the things that make mobile different, we would find that there was no effect of mobile. But instead, the effect of mobile is just as strong, if not even stronger. So there's something going on beyond just the things that we've measured, just beyond the content that we've seen here. I've got another model here, which is a different sort of hierarchical Bayesian analysis. If anybody's interested in that, we can talk about that. Entirely consistent with the results here. So our conclusion is that across the board, no matter what we do, mobile reviews are just more negative. Even after trying to control for all the things that we think are different about mobile are more negative. So even beyond all the other things that we've seen about mobile is still negative. So users are less influenced by mobile reviews than desktop reviews. We're also trying to understand why these things are happening. What's the underlying reason that people are getting to with this? So is it placement on the page? There's some other things that could be confounding this. Are people choosing to do mobile things only when they're really happy or really sad, really mad about something? Not sure about the use of likes as an influence. So there's some things that are less than perfect about our secondary data. So that actually leads well to an experiment. So let's try to control for all these things. So we've done a scenario-based experiment. So put people down and we give them a 2x2 design. Give them a positive review and a negative review. We label some of them desktop, and we label some of them mobile. Bear in mind the reviews are exactly the same. They're just labeled mobile, labeled desktop. Right? This is an example of one of the reviews that's in the scenario here. And we rate, at the end we ask people to rate their credibility, whether it's positive, whether they thought the review was positive or negative, how similar they felt like the reviewer was to their own personal values, how much influence this would have on them, and then a little bit about the timing, about when do they think that they were sitting in the restaurant when they wrote this. And again, reviews are the same. That's the secret, the dirty secret here, is that the reviews are identical in both cases. And so what we see is the usefulness of reviews. There's a difference in positive reviews, there's not a lot of difference. But with negative reviews, that the mobile is seen as much less useful. The follow-up question here is, well, how credible do you think this review is? And again, we see that in the case of the negative reviews, they feel like they're a little bit less credible, but in the positive reviews, a little more credible. I have to caveat this by saying that this is kind of hot off the press, and we don't have, we have a very small sample size so far, but we're still working to expand that. So when we're in this mobile environment, in the social media environment, all the different interactions are much more public and much more visible. And that really, I think, leads to some of the, the final minute here of implications, is they're trying to understand which reviews are going to influence people. Companies are actively monitoring social media and other outlets, which ones should be engaged, which ones are likely to just fall by the wayside, which ones should be responded to. How can you, given that mobile is happening, how can people respond to and try to profit from this? And there's mechanisms to think about encouraging or discouraging mobile reviews. Do you have Wi-Fi in your restaurant or not? That's actually going to encourage people to. I'm not positive that's something you may want to do or not. So we'll see what that. And that's the kind of where we are with our research, and we're interested and open to where you think that this should go next, and what suggestions you think would explain why mobile is negative, despite all of our other controls. Thank you all.